Recording in progress. Okay, guys, here we go into our third week, taking a look at the 13 principles of faith. I will do my very, very best. You guys are going to be armed with your questions to keep asking them, to keep writing them down, and I will do my very best to attend to them as we go through this exciting series. So a little bit of a recap. It's difficult to always remember who was where and who heard everything and who's heard nothing. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we've explored together so far. We've said that there are 13 principles of faith, which the Rambam codifies for us, not in the Ani Ma'amin statements, should I mention. He writes his 13 principles of faith as an essay associated to one of the chapters of the Talmud. And those 13 groups, those 13 beliefs, as it were, are phrased in the negative. Well, they're not phrased in the negative, but the people who don't subscribe to these 13, we are taught, are going to have a big problem because they are going to lose their portion in the world to come. I think one of the most important things that we talked about last week, and we mentioned it at the end of last week, and so I think it pays to mention it at the beginning of this week, is that when we talk about somebody losing a portion in the world to come, which is a divine spiritual punishment, we have to say that a person must be doing this with a certain level of consciousness. And we explained how in any of the 4 punishments, the death penalties, which the Torah prescribes for different infractions, so there has to be a level of consciousness there as well. The person must know that they are doing something that the Torah forbids. A person has to be warned beforehand that they are doing something that the Torah forbids, and then they have to ignore that warning, but made by 2 witnesses, and then they go ahead and do that thing anyway. And if those and other conditions are met, then a person would be sentenced to the death penalty by a Sanhedrin, which doesn't exist anymore, but did exist back then. So if that's the case for capital punishment, so it's going to be the same as well for karet. It's going to be the same for the violation of these principles. In other words, if a person doesn't know that they are expected to believe X, Y, and Z, then how can they really be held accountable? Right? When we talk about, just going back to the capital punishment cases, okay, if somebody knew that they weren't allowed to kill, but accidentally killed someone, they wouldn't be liable to the death penalty. If somebody knew that they shouldn't worship idols, but they didn't realize that this thing that they were bowing down to was an idol, then they can't be held responsible. So the conditions have to be met, and if they're not met, then the person is deemed a shogeg, has done something by accident, inadvertently. And so if someone never knew that they were expected to believe in the existence of a creator, for example, then how could they really be held accountable if they didn't believe it? And if they knew that they had to believe in a creator, but they didn't understand, what that meant, and the things beyond, the rest of the 13. If a person doesn't know and doesn't realize and doesn't understand the importance and doesn't understand the broad nature of what we are expected to believe as Jews, then how can they really be held accountable by the Almighty if they just didn't know? So I think that's an important point to raise at the beginning, because hopefully that will clear the path for us to be able to talk about things and not feel this residual build-up of concern of, what if a person doesn't believe? What if a person didn't learn about this? What if a person doesn't know about this? We would be in far more of a difficult situation if we were presented with all of the facts and then willfully decided to go against it, as it were, and to deny it and to ignore it and to mock it. So I think that's an important point to mention. That was the last.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Not to question it, not to mock it, not to do all those things that you just said.
No, of course to question it. Of course to question it. And a person may take a lifetime to absorb it and may take a lifetime to internalize it. But that's not the same thing as someone who rebelliously
I take
decides. Yeah. It's not the same as someone who rebelliously decides to just, dismiss it.
Okay.
Without giving it
Thank you.
intellectual thought and intellectual honesty as well. Joe.
What about people that are just not interested? They just don't care and they don't want to know. Because I know a lot of those. They just say it's not relevant to them, to their lives, and they're not interested. Talk to people and try to explain things and drop a few things in the conversation. They just couldn't care less. They're just not relevant to their lives and they're not interested at all.
Then you have to
up Jewish. They are Jewish, but
Then you have to daven for them, Joe, because they're missing out on wisdom which can light up their soul.
Well, I feel sorry for them, but what? It's very hard because you'll find nearly so many of them, so many.
There's an interesting thing as well, which we talk about in the Talmud. It's a phrase which I'll translate for you. It's better to keep someone as a shogeg than to turn them into a mazid. In other words, if you want to be able to share some wisdom or you want to share a halacha, which if you told them about it, that they're just going to ignore it, then it might be better to keep them in the dark. I guess the other way of phrasing it would be ignorance is bliss. Because to present, for all intents and purposes, let's use the example of a halakha, to present a Jewish law to them, which that what they're doing is wrong, and that if you tell them, they're going to be like, oh, who cares? And they were to be presented with all of the ramifications and all of the facts and everything like that, and then they were still willfully ignoring it. It might have been better just to leave them in a position where they didn't really appreciate what they were doing was wrong.
Well, they don't believe, so there's nothing you can't do anything with them.
Right. But
even so,
we might be tempted. You learn about something or other, and you see them doing that thing that's wrong, and you say to them, don't you realize how bad it is, danger it is, if you go ahead and do this, and then they're like, well, I don't care. I'm just going to do it anyway. So now we've transitioned them potentially into a new category where they're willfully violating something, having understood all of the background and all the consequences. Maybe it was better not to let them know in the first place.
Mm-hmm. But the thing is, there's some of them are really good, what I would call, I've known for a long time, really good people. They behave, they're really caring and good people. They're not bad people. They just, they just don't.
I never said they were bad people.
No, I'm just saying. So it's very hard to condemn them because,
It's not my job to condemn anybody, Joe.
No, well, I just feel sorry that they're missing out so much.
Our job in our lives is to develop our relationship with the Almighty in a way that is consistent with our abilities and our time and place and our level of intellectual honesty. The only bar we have to live by is our own, the only yardstick. It's not our job to condemn others.
So agreeing with what you've just said wholeheartedly, most of our congregation spend their lives trying to find an accommodation that they can live with, something between being Jewish, knowing that they shouldn't eat treif, etc., etc., the obvious things that they try to do. But I think very few of our congregation would be aware, for instance, of these 13 principles.
Mhm.
They don't, it is not an obvious thing to people that there are a complete set of laws and whatever that can take your whole life and show you how to live a Jewish life. But that does not enter the thinking of 99% of our.
Yeah.
We are taught exactly the way you just said, to set our own bar as high as we can, and that we have a responsibility to our children, etc., etc. That's fine, but there is a.
I don't think we're taught that. Sorry, I'll come back to that in a minute. Go on.
When you become a father, when you get married, you try, I think, to do the very best you can within being Jewish, within all the things that you try to do, keeping kosher, etc., etc. I just think the dichotomy between that and not knowing about the 13 principles of faith, and that there is an entire code by which to live by, leaves us in the position that most of our congregation don't come to shul because they don't connect the two issues. Yes, they're Jewish, they love Israel, they do this, they do that, but actually they don't read through this sort of thing. It's not presented to them in that way. And when I sometimes say to you, I wish we would talk more about God because he happens to be the one good thing that we've got. It's things like this that could be put forward as, actually, let's help you. There is this, why don't we discuss it in the way that you're doing it with us now?
So I agree fundamentally, but disagree on a couple of areas. I think that 99% of our community strive to be good people.
Yeah.
But 99.9% of the community strive to be good people.
Yes.
But won't necessarily realize what Judaism has to say to guide them on that path.
Agreed.
And there's plenty of other good places to look in order to learn how to be a good person. One of those places, of course, is parental influences. So if my parents have taught me how to be a good person, then that's enough for me. But where did your parents learn how to be good people from? So they might have just done whatever was socially acceptable, and that's what they've transferred to you. And what you might have is a whole system where we're relying on an element of trust, of transmission of what it means to be a good person, but that doesn't necessarily come from a level of understanding and expertise in what Judaism has to say. So people can
I agree with every word.
People can be good, certainly in a subjective sense of the word, right? And that means that if I'm raised in the UK, where there are unwritten rules of etiquette and politeness and courtesy and good behavior, and I've got a system of behavior which has been entrenched through the Church of England, and I've got royal role models that I can learn how to be a good person from. So you'll come out being a good person, but that's not necessarily as enriched as it could be by being able to learn from things like Pirkei Avot, which we've seen.
Rabbi Nick, I totally agree with you.
If you'd have grown up in a different society, if you'd have grown up at a different time or a different culture or a different religion or a different country, I'm sure we'd all find that everyone is trying to be a good person, but there are things that other cultures or other societies or other points in history, things which were socially acceptable then or there, which are completely unacceptable now.
I think the point I'm trying to make is slightly different. Where do these people, who are fundamentally, as you say, good people, where did they get the opportunity? I'm now over 70, and this is the first time I've ever read these 13 Principles of Faith. For 70 years, my Rabbonim, my people, some of the most learned in the world, have never thought to themselves, I don't know, what a good idea. Why don't we actually put this in front of Paul and say, this is what we believe would lead a good life. Not that I'm leading a bad life, but I'm leading a different life to the one which is a Torah life, if you like. I'm not sure if that's the right expression or not. Where do the 99.9% get the opportunity to even stop for a minute to read this? It's not on Saturday morning when they come occasionally once in a blue moon. It's not on Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah when we sing all Needens that they've never heard of before. It's just, I'm trying to explain that there is actually a major problem here, and this might actually be it.
Maybe we should ask the publishers of the book to put it not just at the end of the morning service during the week, but put it at the end of the Shabbat service in the morning.
The problem I have is like this, Paul. I can't speak for you personally, but you have been in the presence of great rabbinic educators who, even if they haven't sat with you and walked you through the the particular pages in question, will have definitely spoken thematically about important issues like this.
Absolutely. And I've tried to pick up on them during my life in an experience format. I'm trying to talk about the 99% who haven't had my opportunity. Where are they meant to pick up on this?
So I think because of the fact that we don't have a strong culture amongst the 99% of trying to seek out and trying to learn more, and making the time, carving the time out for this kind of growth and for this type of education, it's not necessarily going to be presented to them because we spend so much time trying to teach children, for example, that Rosh Hashanah is on the 1st of Tishrei and the Chanukah is on the 25th of Kislev, and that gets forgotten the minute they walk out the door. And so we try again next year. We try and teach them an aleph and a bet, and then they don't practice at home and they come back next week and they've forgotten what those were. We slow ourselves down because there's no consistency in the home of these things being developed. Absolutely. God is not part of the conversation. Judaism is not part of the conversation. I don't know what percentage, but there's a huge percentage of members of the United Synagogue for whom they're really just culturally and traditionally entwined with what we do as Jews. So
it's not that they're not accepting what we're talking about. The point I'm making is it's not that they have not accepted the 13 principles or the generality of how to live a Jewish life. We have an entire membership who haven't been given that opportunity to even say, actually, I don't like the 13 principles.
I don't agree with you at all, Paul. I'm sorry. The opportunities are there.
Sorry.
The opportunities are there. People have different lives and they don't take them. You can go to what I used to call Jews College. It's open to everybody and anybody, and there's lectures and discussions going on all day long, every day, other than Shabbat. There are many opportunities, and one has to accept that the vast majority of people have neither the time, or they consider they haven't got the time, or make the effort to devote the time to attend
the inclination,
trying to learn something. And
but it might not be as conscious as that, Martin.
No, it might not be as conscious.
We might be so embroiled in the strength of a cultural tie to Judaism that it just never enters into people's minds. One of my evidences for this is the fact that our Judaica shops, our Jewish bookshops, are not used in the same way as a Waterstones or a W.H. Smith. There's so much that people could read, but people don't don't read. They for whatever reason, their souls or their minds are not drawn to that kind of education, to that kind of development. And you'll have people who go to buy a set of candlesticks or a Kiddush cup or a challah board from a Judaica shop, and they walk in and they're completely oblivious to the amazing range of books that are right there on the shelf. We don't consume Jewish learning and Jewish information and Jewish wisdom in the same way that we do pursue other things. And because there's so many other temptations and so many other distractions and so many other ways that we use up our time, it's a very difficult barrier to break through.
Which is what I was saying. The opportunity is there if one has the time or the inclination to take it up. If you don't take it up, then what more can you do? You know, the old.
But societally, there's no pressure. Societally, there's no pressure. Societally, there's no pressure to take it up because it's so entrenched that to be Jewish, the list of tick boxes are very cultural.
Yeah.
And so for a traditional Jew, which is 99% of our membership, you can rely on the social acceptance that you've done a Friday night dinner and come away feeling like I'm a good Jew and I'm a committed Jew and I'm a passionate Jew and I've got a strong Jewish identity. And that will never be called into question because there's not enough of a momentum. There's not enough of a societal push to do anything more than that, which I'm sure sociologists may have all kinds of good reasons for, but you know, that's the trend that we're trying to break. That's
wholeheartedly, yeah.
That's the trend that we're trying to break. And we're not trying to break it because people aren't good people. We're trying to break it because there's more to a Jewish life. But it's not easy. And we've been trying for decades and we're still not there, Paul.
But I wouldn't mind if people said no. It's the fact that they're not even shown. They're not even. I have never been given the opportunity to disagree with these 13 principles of faith.
Well, you just have not sorted out or taken it.
When?
Because
one's come to it. I've sat in shul many times.
Oh yeah, in shul
as you, but I've never noticed anyone read them.
Well, it is in the.
I've never heard a sermon about them. I've never heard anything about them.
It's in the Siddur. You could have questioned it, but there are lectures.
Why would I?
From time to time. Yeah.
Why would I question this? Why would I pick up a Siddur and start questioning it?
Well, you've answered your own question then.
Because you're Jewish.
Yeah. Why would you pick up a Siddur? I'm sure you do question it. We're getting away from.
I'm not in full agreement with you there, Martin. Because as I said, you know, I gave a talk about what it means to love Hashem, and people say, well, you know, I grew up going to Hasmonean and no one ever talked to me about loving Hashem. Also, we've said this many times. The sermons are not usually of this kind of depth, and the reason is because one of the primary functions of a sermon is to encourage people to come back the following week. I was always taught that one of the functions of a Shabbat table is, you know, when you've got kids around the table, what you're really trying to do is get them to come back the following week. We're always trying to get them to just come back, to keep the foot in the door, to keep them in the game, because when they are actually ready, when they are open to these conversations, then you've got a great framework in place that can be provided. But, you know, this is so far detached, really. This is so far detached from what people might be looking for, that it's not easy. You've got to work at closing the gap before making it available. You will have spent years not going to Lunch and Learn and then made a decision to start going to Lunch and Learn. But there's thousands of people in Bushy who haven't started going to Lunch and Learn, who haven't called up the rabbi to ask him a question. You know, the primary space that we get to interact with people in any kind of philosophical way is at a shiva house. You know, it's people aren't calling me up saying, "Oh, I've got you a question, Rabbi. That's how Donnie always says. I've got you a question. I've got a question for you, Rabbi. Why is it that right?
But then you're putting the fault
People are printing out Rabbi Sacks's parsha sheet.
But we can't keep blaming the people. It's not the people's fault, because I don't think that's what the Torah says. I don't think it blames the.
Why are we blaming anyone? We're merely acknowledging why it would be. We're merely acknowledging why it would be that people haven't been exposed to this stuff. It's not.
Our whole culture is certainly in my generation, my lifetime. When you, for example, Lubavitch used to stand at the desk in the desk going to Israel at the airport and ask people to put tefillin on. The culture has been to just do a mitzvah. If you do an extra mitzvah, no one's really. They don't actually.
But Martin, that's a good example because
there with a passage of Talmud or something to explain why you would put tefillin on. It was purely, as long as you do put tefillin on, you performed a mitzvah. So I suppose...
That's a good example, Martin. It's a good example. I'll tell you why I think it's a good example, because let's say somebody learns one day at the age of 70, 80, whatever it is, and they learn about the importance of tefillin, right? And they learn about the depth of the mitzvah and how important it is, and what a beautiful mitzvah it is to be able to put tefillin on every day, and it doesn't take long, and it's this and it's that. And then someone turns around and says, you know, if I'd have learned, you know, if I'd have seen tefillin 50 years ago, what a different story it could have been. And then you can turn around and be like, well, I mean, you've been to Ben Gurion, haven't you? You've seen people offering you to wear tefillin. It's not like it hasn't been available to you. It's just that your antennas were not receptive to it. So people walk past Lubavitchers trying to offer people tefillin, and they think it's just a bunch of, you know, loony, ultra-Orthodox people that don't have anything, that completely disconnected from your Jewish identity. And so a person could have these things in their face. They could be coming to shore. That they're sitting with an 800-page book every time they come, and it's right in front of their faces. They've just never flicked through the book. People could flick through the book. You know, I know we announced we're on page 361 for Ein Kamocha, whatever it is, but people could flick through the book and go, oh, look at this, page 164, Ani Ma'amin, I believe with perfect faith.
Let's agree to disagree. I don't think we should ever be blaming the people as such. I think we can blame ourselves as maybe teachers, maybe as examples. Maybe I haven't done enough to be an example to my children, to my grandchildren. I can blame myself, but I can't really blame them. I can't
blaming anyone. Blaming anyone is rather fruitless. What we can do is identify that there's a problem, and then try and figure out how to solve that problem. But the problem is not an easy problem to solve, because there is a huge gulf between the person who's trying to solve the problem and the 99% of people who don't even realize that there's a question, that don't even realize that there's a problem. Because 99% of our membership are proud Jews, identify as Jews, and do what they do because that's what people do, and that's how we've always done it, and there's no need to question it. Why rock the boat? So, you know, until we figure out how to close the chasm, it just perpetuates, really.
Thank you very much.
And we haven't discussed the 13 principles of faith, and it's 1:45.
But this is also important. This is also important, Martin. All right. So by way of summary for last week's class, well, that's the doorbell. So by way of trying to refresh our memories on what we've been talking about, we've said that we have these 13 principles of faith, which were not written in the Torah as a list, we tried to explore together last week where the Rambam gets these ideas from. And if you remember, we saw a Mishnah which talks about a group of people or groups of people who would lose their place in the world to come. He expanded that list in his 14-volume book of Halacha, right? His digest of all of the Jewish laws. He then expanded that list and took those categories and helped us understand that when we talk about people like a minim, right? These, I guess the closest translation in English might be an atheist. So people who don't believe that there's a creator, people who don't believe that there is a creator who is just one, who don't believe that that there are no physical ways in which you could describe God, who don't believe that he is the first and he is the last, who don't believe that he is the channel through which we should pray. So we saw that there were parallels between the ways in which he defined those groups and defined those categories and the list that makes it into the final cut, the 13 principles of faith. So that was what we saw last week. Let's see what we can try and cover today as we try and spend a few minutes thinking about this even further. And let's see if I can play for time so that next week we start to actually discuss the first of the 13 principles, rather than start this week and then need to stop. So here is something that we can take some time to consider. I was hoping we'd get into actually starting to talk about the list today. All right, let's maybe try and talk about this, and then if I need to go back to my notes next week, I can go back to my notes next week. When we talk about these 13 principles, these 13 foundations, and we've asked, why is it not fewer? Why is it not more? Why are some things kept in? Why are some things left out? For example, we have said that it doesn't mention free will as any of the principles of faith. It doesn't mention to believe that we are part of the chosen people. That's a very important thing in Judaism. So perhaps we can think about it in the following way. These 13 principles of faith seem to be the building blocks for building a Jewish mindset. These are 13 strands that we have to connect to. And we're trying to get a grip on why it would be that a person who willfully ignores these 13 principles, why it would be that the consequence of that is to be spiritually cut off. But if we think about it, if we are choosing not to attach ourselves to these 13 things, then there's going to be a repercussion to the conscious effort to detach ourselves to these 13 things. So what we're really doing and what we're really saying is that we're carving out a space for which living as a Jew, living according to the Torah, performing the mitzvot, this is the spiritual system that we are attaching ourselves to, which in the absence of them, we're kind of severing a very important part of a connection with Hashem. I don't know if I'm concerned that everyone's looking at me a bit puzzled. But in other words, if a person was to say that they don't believe in a creator, and they don't believe that he is one, and they don't believe that he can do anything for you, etc., then why should a person be surprised then if they go upstairs and that creator, so to speak, doesn't want anything to do with them? This person has spent their whole life deciding, preaching, living by the belief that when he dies or she dies, that there's not going to be anything there, that there's not going to be any creator, there's not going to be any God, there's not going to be all-loving, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, omni anything creator who is there to, shelter him under the shadow of his wings. Then why should we be surprised if the repercussion, if the consequence of that is being spiritually cut off? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It makes a lot of sense. I still have my biggest problem with these 13 principles. First of all, I've God forbid, I'm not criticizing or in any way doubting the Rambam. But what right did he have to say this is paramount? That's number one. And number two is this difficulty I have in most of the things we do are positive. I know we have negative commandments: you shan't kill, you shan't steal, but keeping kashrus is a positive. You can do it because you're Jewish. This is what my father did. This is what I'm going to do because I believe in being Jewish and keeping Judaism alive. You can't force people's mind to believe something they find difficulty in believing. That's the difficulty I have with the 13 principles.
And sadly,
you cut somebody off because genuinely they have great difficulty. They see terrible things going on and they have a difficulty in understanding that Hashem is there for them. It's difficult to explain. I have this discussion with my grandchildren who do have difficulty because they're good people, as Joseph.
Regrettably, Martin, we're going to have to come to that next week because we could have got to that today, but that pretty much starting to talk about that. We need a fresh palette to be able to do that next week. We can't jump into that.
I'm sorry. Josephine,
with 6 minutes on the clock, but you've made an important point, and I've made a note of it, because we have to address the question of how can one be commanded to believe. In a similar vein, how can you be commanded to love? Love is an emotion. You either feel it or you don't. So we've got a lot of ground to be able to cover, to be able to speak about that. And
I think Josephine doesn't realise she's muted.
Yeah, I muted her before because she kept coughing.
Oh, right.
Sorry, Joe. There you go. You're still
muted, Joe. We can't hear.
No matter how disconnected the 99% are, it's a strange phenomenon that they always come to Yiska for their parents. I've got a cousin.
They have a belief.
But so they must be a belief in some. They must believe. I have a cousin. She's quite ill and old, and she never keeps kosher. She never does anything, but never misses Yiska. So they must believe in something.
There'll be lots of examples like that. However disconnected people might be, they still show up at the Seder table. However disconnected people might be, they still show up on Rosh Hashanah. However disconnected people might, there's lots of examples like that, Joe. It's not just Yiska.
No, but they must believe them, mustn't they? You know,
Not
they must.
necessarily.
You
Not
know,
necessarily.
no?
Some people show up to these things because they feel a level of guilt if they don't, or family pressure. So our job is not necessarily to get into the heads of 99% of our membership. Our job is to get into our own heads, and to see what it is that speaks to us, and how we deal with it. By the way, one of the things that we would have noticed in the lists of people who are not going to be given a place in the share in the world to come. So in that list, we didn't see reward and punishment. Do you remember we pointed that out?
Yeah.
That there were lots of parallels, but one of the parallels was not reward and punishment. And Rabbi Tatz had a really clever way of explaining this. If you remember, we have a mission in Pirkei Avot that says, "Do not serve for the sake of reward."
Yes.
Remember that?
Yeah.
Do not serve your master for the sake of reward. Rather, serve your master like someone who does not expect a reward. So he says the reason why a person who doesn't believe in reward and punishment won't be spiritually cut off, as Rabbi Tatz would pronounce it, if they didn't believe that, is because actually, were they to get upstairs and have served Hashem and didn't believe that there was going to be any reward, he says, what greater way of serving Hashem could there possibly be? It's one of the most sublime things to be able to go through life without any expectation of reward. What was that?
Sharp the knife.
Okay, interesting. What possible more sublime way of living life could there be than to go through life without believing that there was going to be reward coming your way? So I thought that was quite an interesting thing. So, if these are strands that by connecting ourselves to them, we are then kind of ensuring that there is a thread of connection when we pass from this world, then what we really need are the opportunities to be able to talk about them and to be able to learn about them and to be able to build a framework, a mental framework and a philosophical framework to be able to get into that headspace. And that's why these are so important. These are 13 ways in which we define the mindset of a Jew, which, going back to some of our earlier conversations today, people aren't necessarily speaking in that language because people feel Jewish. People are connected to Judaism. People were born a Jew. So, this is all part. We are Jewish with or without these things. But the repercussion, as it were, of actively disconnecting ourselves from these principles is that a person shouldn't be surprised when they get upstairs and the fog clears and then you're like, oh man, that was actually all true and I've disconnected myself from it, and that's it. So
thought came to mind, Rabbi, that if he was alive today and he had to rewrite the 13 principles, would those principles be the same, or would they be in other words, could some of our 99%ers actually be doing 40% of what is right, although it is not quite in the same ilk and written the same way? In other words, we read the Torah as it was given 4,000 years ago, whatever, but we have not moved it on. It has stayed stationary, which is correct, but it does make you wonder if it was. We always said
what I'm going to do, because I'm going to have to.
One problem we had with Muslims was that they take their writings absolutely word for word and they believe everyone. And the one thing Rabbi Sachs always had, and those sort of people always had, they don't interpret, they don't review, they don't question, they don't look. And yes, I think you would say that actually that's we shouldn't be doing that in the Jewish case.
I'm going to share the translation that I found on the internet of the essay that the Rambam wrote. I'll share that with you all so you can have a little
Right.
look through that. But you asked the question, would the Rambam write things differently if he was writing nowadays? So I don't know if he would have come to any different conclusions for the 13, but what you'll see is that he's basically identifying all of the shortcomings and all of the mistaken beliefs that people had at the time. And we might read them and think that, wow, this is quite prescient. You know, there's still people who think in these ways. And I'll share it with you so you can have a look at it.
Marvelous, thank you.
But he was writing at a time of like, I can see the way that the world is. I can see what everyone thinks, and it compels me to want to correct you. So I'm not sure that he would have come to a different 13 or added a 14th because of the fact that it's 2022. But you know, have a look through his essay, and then you can let me know whether you think differently. And realize, of course, keep in mind as you read it that he is writing in the 12th century. So. So keep. Oh, what's just happened there? Where's my camera?
Are you putting it on online?
Right.
Guys, oh,
There you are. You're back.
there you go. Sorry, I'm putting it online. So what I have done, Joe, is I've taken our recordings from the last couple of weeks. I've put them on the Shul YouTube channel, but you can only access them if you've got the link.
Right.
So they're not visible. If someone goes on their phone now and looks for those videos, they won't be there.
Right. So
But
how
they're
do we get
posted on
it?
the Shul channel. On the WhatsApp group, you'll see the links.
Okay. thank
Okay.
you.
And
Marvelous, thank you, Rabbi.
that gives you access, and you can share it with anyone that you think might be interested in it. But I didn't think it was going to be good for us to have it for everyone to consume. Not that anyone watches any videos anyway, but yeah, I think it'll be good for people to be able to have it for review. So, all right, that's all we've got time
Thank
for.
you,
Join us
thank
again next
you.
week, and we'll
Thank you,
actually,
Rabbi.
please God, start talking about the 13 principles.
Thank you.